Hey, how's it going, everybody? Shaun here with another edition of Shaun Solo, and today I want to talk about hatred. Yes, hatred, the most reviled game that nobody had played up until this past weekend. Well, at least in recent history. So the thing is, the reason I wanted to talk about this is I was kind of debating whether I even wanted to get into this at all. But honestly, I kind of feel obligated to in a certain sense. I mean, this is not this is just like a hobby of mine. Like I like to make videos, like talk about video games and stuff like that. So, but I feel like there's just socially there's something here to talk about that's interesting. So this game Hatred, the trailer came out a few months ago, and a small consortium of bloggers and think piece writers from various media outlets, kind of went on the offensive and started attacking this game as one of the most grotesque, disgusting examples of the medium of video games. Because in the game, it appears that you are some kind of grimdark, I don't know, what would you call it? Like heavy metal stereotype serial killer from something like out of the early 90s. Like it's really antiquated, just the entire aesthetic of it. But people kind of blew it way out of proportion and maybe gave this game way more attention than it would have ever received. And in great ironic fashion, it's actually going to make the game more popular. It's probably going to move some more copies. Now, a few months back, there was such an outrage, or perceived outrage. Perceived, the amount of outrage is debatable, because I don't think a lot of people really gave a shit. But it was even able. They were so persistent they were able to get Steam to, for a short time, take it down from the Steam store, which then caused more outrage, and they went back on it and they put it back up on the store, because this is what we're dealing with is right now is it's a form of censorship. If we want to believe and treat games as art, then you kind of have to respect that some of it's not going to be for you. It is a, like I said, it's kind of a freedom of speech issue in terms of whether or not we should allow these kind of things into the video game marketplace at all. In my opinion, you should. I don't see the problem with it. Yeah, do I think it looks stupid and immature? For sure, yeah. It's not something that even would have been on my radar. I probably never would have even thought twice about this game. I never would have bought it. I never would have really cared about it at all. But I just felt pushed into caring about it, or even thinking about it, considering it. It has the exact opposite effect as what's intended. It's because these articles and things that are written weren't about really exposing anything. It was just more of clickbait, think piece bullshit that you see so often nowadays. It's kind of the dominates, especially games journalism. I get in quotes, quote unquote, games journalism. It's not really fucking journalism. It's a bunch of bloggers. Really, it's no different than what I do. I have a blog. I share my opinions. Sometimes they're popular, sometimes they're not. But it doesn't. It doesn't mean I'm right. I don't get to be. I don't get to make didactic statements. It's just my opinion. The problem with a lot of the tone of a lot of articles about hatred and similar articles when talking about being socially conscious, I suppose, is that they take on this kind of didactic stance about this is right, unequivocally true. It's they posit things as truisms when they're really not. It's really just a person's opinion, and they have every right to have that opinion if that's how they feel. But the problem, especially with Hatred, is that it was based on a trailer. It wasn't even based on the game. It was just based on the idea, the notion of this violent video game where you're a serial killer that just hates everything, and you go out and just murder innocent civilians, and that's the whole tact of the game. You're gonna get points and whatnot just for murdering people, just walking out in the streets and going on a killing spree, which is not too dissimilar from other games that have come out in the past. The first game that comes to mind is probably the Postal series. That game is pretty egregiously just gross, and that was the intention. The intention is to kind of be incendiary. It's not about. It's more I don't know. It's shock filmmaking. It's the grindhouse era of movies and stuff like that. A lot of that stuff was just made the way it was just to sell tickets. And in the same tact, some video games have come out in the sense because they just know they'll sell some copies. Like, they can have these interesting mechanics inside of this like really gross, morally reprehensible game, and it's gonna attract people because it's gonna court controversy. So there's a reason behind developing games this way. Another game that comes to mind is the Manhunt series, which actually did have like a big vocal contingent of like even like politicians and stuff getting into it, and parent groups and whatnot trying to get the game banned from coming out at all. And what the thing to keep in mind is that was like old school, super right wing conservatives, right? So now on the other end of the spectrum, we have like very nouveau left wing liberal crazy fucks that are kind of taking the same tact as people that they would, I imagine, would not want to, share company with intellectually. And it's just a weird thing. It's just but we see it more and more, like just the social policing of our media. And it's just something I don't agree with, because I'm okay living in a world that has things that aren't for me and that I don't care about. And the notion that these things are going to somehow socially engineer people to be, I don't know, like gross, misogynist, sexist fucking pigs is there's no data to support it. I mean, granted, I'll give people this. I don't think video games have been in a state of complexity long enough for there even to be data. I think that's something we can't even really look at until like another 10 years or so. But there is no proof as of right now that it creates any type of aggression. And any example people will bring up of people, that have experienced video games or music or movies or TV shows and have gone out and done terrible things, they're pretty isolated. And if you have any brain inside your head, you probably just think, well, maybe that's just a fucked up person that was already had problems long before they ever got a hold of whatever media they were enjoying or getting into. And I think the same thing is can be said for hatred. I don't think the game looks that interesting. I don't. But now, like, I'm in a position where I'm actually going to play it now, because I want to judge games based on the game, not based on somebody else's opinion. I mean, I read reviews and I engage with this kind of stuff on an intellectual level. I enjoy it. I enjoy a lot of op-eds and stuff like that when it comes to video games. I really do. Because I'm a person that believes in the subjective nature of criticism to a certain degree. I think there's some nuts and bolts stuff you have to cover about whether a game works or it doesn't work in a review. But I think like moral policing games is questionable, at least the way that it's done a lot of times, in the terms of it, like when your subjectivity gets in the way of like the actual game and what the actual game accomplishes or does. I think it just becomes very narrow-minded, and then you have this thing where people feel like they're above criticism of their criticism, which is ridiculous, because if you go out in a public forum and you say things, then you're going to be subject to criticism about your criticism, and that's okay. Granted, people are a little immature about it. It gets out of hand often, but to say that you're above it because, well, that's just my opinion, well, you still have to stand up. Your arguments still have to stand up in a court of public opinion, of public law, because other people have opinions about your opinions. And if you feel like your criticism holds weight, or it was fair, or you're right unequivocally, or even just subjectively, what's the problem with just pointing that out? Pointing out why you were right, here's some examples, blah, blah, blah. And if a review is really well written, then I can't imagine that people are going to have a problem with that. It's when your subjective opinion about like things like theme or the skin color of the characters or the gender of the characters and how they're represented kind of gets in the way of your actual review. That's when it becomes a problem. It's like almost like you kind of have to separate the two. You can write a review, you can kind of briefly touch on your opinions in the subjective fashion in terms of like content, narratively, or just even broader than that, thematically. And then maybe go ahead and just write a piece about why you feel this way about it. I think there does need to be kind of a clear delineation, and that's just because the video game industry, just like the film industry and all whatnot, is incredibly large. Video games have surpassed films in terms of revenue on a yearly basis, in terms of how much they make. So it's which is kind of crazy to think about, but it's becoming the dominant medium for entertainment. And it's not that it's like I said, I don't have a problem with people writing the things that they write, but I think just like their candor after the fact is generally kind of off-putting and unfair, because a lot of times they don't back up their arguments with anything. And it's just, if you want to enter into an intellectual discussion with people, because that's what you're doing when you write something, you're inviting people to comment, you're inviting people to have discussion about what you wrote and talk to you further about it. I mean, that's just kind of goes with the territory. So, but to go back to the hatred thing, I think a lot of people, they just knee-jerk reactionary things, and they kind of just ran with it. It comes off very cynical and clickbaity and kind of just gross. It was just something to rail against. It's like one of those like wrong time or right place, right time situations for a video game like this specifically, just because of how much hullabaloo has been going on about social responsibility in games. Because there's this kind of fantasy out there, this fairy tale that most people believe, well, you can only make this kind of video game or this kind of video game. I am perfectly comfortable living in a world where I get to experience all different modes of video games. I think very comfortably something like Battlefield 4 can stand right alongside Gone Home. I don't have a problem. I actually enjoy the fact that the medium is being pushed in different directions. And some games are telling socially conscious stories. That is fantastic. I think that's great. I don't think it's great for every game to be like that. I just don't. So yeah, I guess we're going to have to see for ourselves in terms of hatred. Because now I'm going to play it. Like I said, I wasn't going to play it before. But the amount of attention they put on it, it makes me even morbidly curious, even if it's just for that. Like, now I have to see it for myself, because it just looks like a fucking twin stick shooter, and I don't really care about that genre. I don't play very many games like that. It's the controversy is similar to something like even like Hotline Miami, which is a puzzle-based murder simulator for the most part, and that caught some flack too. For Hotline Miami 2 in the previews, where they had they're having a sexual assault was in the game, and people lost their minds over it. The idea that the thing about just video games, we have a rating system, it is self-regulated, and it's not for everybody. The idea that video games should be able to be played by any age demographic is ridiculous. You gotta put some onus on parents to watch their kids and make sure their kids are not engaging in things they don't want them to. That's their personal responsibility. It's not society's responsibility to do that for you. Society has already done some of the lifting with things like ratings and whatnot, and that's a different discussion whether or not those are effective. But hatred's kind of, they're using the ratings board kind of against this game, where you got an AO, adults only, one of the most rare video game ratings ever. And it doesn't really make any sense. It feels I can feel the bias, Twitch has decided not to allow people to stream hatred because it's an adult only game, which I think has a lot to do with why it got that rating. And also, GOG, my favorite place to buy games, decide not to carry it, which I think is fine. They're well within their rights to. I think at the end of the day, if Steam didn't want to carry it either, also think that would have been fine. I think it would be really hypocritical, just the amount of other games that are similar and the amount of garbage that's on Steam. From all the early access stuff to the Greenlight program, there's just some real shit. Not just mechanically, but there's also just thematically some really weird, gross shit down there. And to pick hatred out of the group because a few people decided to write articles about it seems really disingenuous. GOG is a little different because they are pretty heavily curated. That's a curated site. They're not, they don't just throw up whatever. You have to go through kind of a standard, more classical approval process to get on that site. And they actually play your games before they're on the site. As a company, that's part of their thing. So I guess in closing, I'm gonna have to play Hatred for myself to see whether it is what all the hysteria is about. Because I think that's fair. I think if I'm going to have an opinion about it, like I should probably at least play it. I don't know. It's just like I don't know. So much of video gaming, just in terms of the coverage and stuff, is just starting to really suck. I mean, it sucked for a while, but it's just reaching levels of just incredulous. It's incredulous. Blah, blah, blah. Words that you can use that say things that are ridiculous. Anyways, well, so that's gonna do it for me. I'm definitely gonna check this game out. I'm gonna be playing it pretty soon here, and I'll talk to you guys next time I got something to talk about. Hopefully, I'll have a gameplay video for you, and we can go on this journey together and see whether or not it's worth the ire of America. Thank you. Good night.